I'd like to convene the special meeting of the Union County Water and Sewer District Board of Governors, special meeting. And then our first item is 22-857, water and sewer rates. And Brian Matthews, I'd like to recognize Brian Matthews to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. We were asked to have a special meeting tonight, and that's what this is one of the agenda items. This had to do with the discussion on the residential rates and potentially the board making a decision to change those rates, to essentially roll those back, have a bit of a presentation, and then also some information about some upcoming items that the board will need to consider and some things that you'll need to do in the future. So first off, just give you a little update on kind of where we started. Obviously provide you some information about the current residential water and sewer rates, about what it would be for resetting those pre-July 2022, and then what are the base rates, and then what are the volumetric charges that we have. So back in early 2022, June, July of 2022, there was the board made a decision to balance our rates. Essentially what we had at the time was our water rate customers were actually paying less than the cost of service, and our sewer rate customers were actually paying more than the cost of service. So what we did is we asked the board to balance those rates where the water rate customers were actually increased. Essentially is about 14% for the balancing, and then another 7% for a rate increase. And then sewer customers' rates were then decreased, but they did also receive a 7% rate increase on there. So there was a decrease in sewer rates, there was an increase in water rates. That was a balancing, plus there was a 7% rate increase on top of that. So that was all prior to current today. That took effect in September 1st of 2022. Decision was made essentially in June of 2022. So that's where we stood at that time. Just to give you an example of what that looked like, so for residential customers only, and this is residential customers only, in 2022, the rate that was in effect prior to the balancing and prior to the rate increase, the 7% rate increase, that was for a standard meter, $14.60 was the base charge. When I say base charge, that means that if you don't use any water whatsoever, you're going to be charged $14.60. If you use water, you pay that plus you pay your volumetric, which means your usage rate. So this base charge was $14.60. When you balanced it, it went to $16.66, and then the 7% increase made it $17.83. So if the board were to take action to roll those rates back, the rate would go back to $14.60. That would be the rate for the base charge for a 3/4 inch meter. You have all the other meters that are on there. I will go through them if you like. Essentially, you can see them. Each one of those has a base charge, and it would go back to that first column. That's the number it would go back to. All right. Next item has to do with the volumetric rates. That is the usage rates. And we have a tiered system. So when you use more water, there's more cost to the customer. The less water you use, there's a lower cost. And so you see those tiers that we have. And essentially, I'll start with the lowest tier. In 2020, basically 2021, 2022, the original per gallon cost for a residential customer using 3,000 gallons or less was $3.50. The balancing made that $3.99. And then the 7% rate increase for that particular year, effective 9/1, made it $4.27. If you were to change that, you essentially would go back to the $3.50 rate, which was effective at that time. Now, as you can see, there are some water shortage requirements. We are required to have rates based on a conservation. Because of the Yadkin project, some of the other things we're involved in, we have some drought requirements that we have to meet. And so you have stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. water rates based on those conservation requirements, those would again be the same as they were at that time, as the effective date that they were. As you can see, those other tiers would also go back to their original tiered rate that was effective at the time. So this also affects our wastewater customers. As I said, we did a balancing for water and for sewer for our customers, and for residential customers only. Our volumetric rates for residential customers on the wastewater, 0 to 12,000 gallons, originally was $8.55, went to $7.20, so it declined because, again, those folks there was a decrease for their particular rate. And from there, the 7% increase made their rate, which was effective 7/1/22, $7.71. So if the board were to go back to the effective rates as of 7/1/22, it would be $8.55. It would go back to that particular rate. And then, as you can see, if it was greater than 12,000, there is no additional rate for that. We essentially have a cap for residential customers. We just don't charge them any additional one for if it's over that amount. Okay. There is also a base charge for wastewater. So base charges have some similar size requirements. I'll start with the 3/4 inch. That's just the most common for residential. Effective in previous was $17.90 for the base rate for sewer. That balancing changed that to $15.08. That actually, again, went down. And then the 7% increase on top of that made that $16.13. If the board were to make a decision, we would go back to the $17.90 base charge for residential sewer customers. That would be the effect of that change. Just to give you an idea of just so you have an idea of what's going on with the number of customers, water-only customers means they have no sewer account. We have approximately 13,620 customers who are water-only customers. I'm one of those. What would happen is they would have a decrease of around 22% in their rates. That's the balancing would go away, as well as the rate increase would go away. For sewer-only customers, we have 236 of those sewer-only customers. They would see an increase of approximately 9% in their rates because they are sewer-only customers. And then for those that are water and sewer customers together, and that's over 41,000 customers, they would see a decrease in their water rates of 22%, and then they would see an increase in their sewer rates of approximately 9%. So just to give you an idea of what that impact is, and a typical household that uses 5,500 gallons would see approximately a $1.79 decrease in their bill. Now, that's a typical customer. You use more, there's going to be a different bill that you're going to pay. You're probably going to be higher. If you use less, it's probably even less that you're going to have to pay. It really depends on what the household uses. Before a typical customer who uses 5,500 gallons, the estimated decrease is around $1.79 on their monthly bill for their water and sewer usage, which is combined on their bill. Just to give you an idea of the financial impact, so you have an idea, these are estimates. Understand, we have to estimate our revenues. We originally estimated, our 2022 rates and for water, for base as well as volumetric, and sewer, base and volumetric, totals of around $56 million. So the new rates, which is previous to what we had, that was the adopted balancing, that was the 7% rate increase, we were going to generate approximately $59 million. So with the difference, the board were to go back, we're going to have essentially about a $3.4 million reduction in revenues. We're really going back to revenue neutral, so to speak. We're going back to the $56 million estimate, that is the estimate of what our revenues would be, we're going back to that number, as opposed to the 59 million, which is what we estimated with the increase that we would have from those 7% increases for rates. That's all the information I have at this time about the particular rates. I do want to tell the board that we were unable to have fully baked information for you to see all of the impacts for our other rate classifications: industrial, commercial, agricultural, irrigation. Those are future decision points you will need to make. You'll need to give us some direction on what do you want to do with those rate classifications. You'll need to give us direction on the projects that you want to see inside your capital plan, because that will build what our impact will be on our rate model. We need to know what kind of structure you want to have for financing. Are we going to pay 100% cash? Are we going to debt fund some of those? Are we going to find other sources, ARPA funds, other ways to fund projects? And those are all decision points that you're going to have to give us. We're going to have to look at that in a holistic approach. We'll have to understand what impact that may or may not have on our bond covenants as well as our ratings, so that you can make an informed decision. We're not prepared to do all that tonight. It is our plan to do that on January the 17th. That is a regular board meeting. That is scheduled for Tuesday, and that's the day after the holiday, so it's Tuesday, January 17th. Currently, that meeting's scheduled for 6 o'clock. We may ask the board to consider to move that to an earlier time, but obviously your schedules are going to be important. But what we intend on doing is focusing primarily on this topic and really not having a lot of other business items, if possible, for the board to consider. It's really focusing on this utility discussion because it's important, and honestly, it's going to be a heavy lift. So it's going to be several hours of information and board interaction. Ultimately, we're really not looking for a lot of decisions at that meeting because we want you to think about it, be prepared at a future meeting to give us official decisions. Now, you can give us decisions, but we would certainly recommend that you think about those things before you make a decision. And that's our goal for January the 17th. We do intend on having our financial advisor available at that meeting. We also intend on having the bond counsel available, and if possible, our folks that do our rate model as well as our system development fee study, Stantec. We intend on seeing if they are available to attend. We're not sure they can attend at this point in time, but it's our goal to have them there as well. And then staff will be present to answer any questions from the staff's perspective. That's all the information I have at this point in time. I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Yes, sir.
Why did we do a rate increase? Why did you propose a rate increase?
We proposed a rate increase in order to fund the capital plan, which is currently in place. So there are a number of projects that the board decided that you wanted to see built. That was the Site B wastewater plant. That was improvements to the 12 Mile Creek plant, as well as a significant other number of capital plans, which all needed some level of debt to be able to pay for that. It was impossible to pay for that by cash, and the only way to fund that was to have rate increases to fund all of those capital items.
So the lack of these rate increases will impact short-term extensions and items like that?
So that's a very good question, and that's really what we get into on January the 17th. The board is going to have to look at, this is how much money we have. These are how many projects we have. What do you want to do, and how does that add up to how much money we have? And if you say, I'm going to take these items out, that's fine. Okay, I'm going to leave these items in. Do we have enough money to pay for everything? And if you don't have enough money to pay for everything, well then what's our appetite for how we pay for it? Is it debt? Is it some other way to pay for it? And then if we can't, then it may mean that there are even further cuts to capital projects that you may have to do in order to reach the amount that you are willing to fund. We don't know that till you tell us that. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir.
Chairman, I guess my understanding your intent
Board of Governors will discuss it and have a motion, and then, and if it passes, then we'll carry it on to our special meeting. So, yeah, we'll be voting on some of these issues tonight.
How can you vote on something when you don't even know what the implications are? What's your opinion on that?
Well, my opinion is that you will receive a significant amount of information on the 17th. The board can change your mind. Let me make that very clear. If you decide to do something today, if you decide to do that today, it doesn't stop you from changing your mind, and we can halt that bus if we have to. Is that the perfect way to do it? No, that isn't the perfect way to do it, honestly. But can it be done? Absolutely, it can be done. We can certainly halt that if necessary. I'm glad you brought that up. We can't snap our fingers and make rate changes. So if you voted on it and say, I want these changes now, that can't happen today. We actually have a process we have to go through to change all our rate tables. We have to notify the customers. All that has to be done before those bills are sent out and the customer receives a bill saying, well, hey, my bill went down or my bill went up, whichever one of those are. The earliest we'll be able to get new bills in our customers' hands would be in the February timeframe. So to answer your question, it is not the perfect solution to do it this way, but certainly you can, and it could be changed if the board decided to.
We have so much time to notify Moody's of a change, if we make a change. And
Okay.
did you ever find,
Yes, if there is a rating change, we have 10 days from today to notify our bondholder that we have changed our water and sewer rate. 10 days from today.
so waffling back and forth, it's not, we're going to send a bad message to our bonding agency.
It certainly could, obviously. I don't have an answer other than we're required to notify them of rate changes.
I've got a question. So if, as I understand it, the bonding agencies are implementing changes currently, is that correct?
That is correct. Would you like me to talk about that a little bit?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't mind it actually, and if you can also confirm that if the board took zero action tonight, that there would still be possibility that the bond ratings may be affected.
Certainly. So currently, the way we have it is we have a bond rating for our general obligation bonds, and then we have a bond rating for our utility and how the utility functions. We have 3 rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, and they rate all those different categories. And we currently have a AAA bond rating for our general obligation bonds, which school bonds are general obligation bonds. And then we have a AA plus and AA, and it's a mix, but it's mostly AA for our for our utility with the rating agencies. Moody's has made a decision that they are going to change the way that they evaluate their ratings. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what that looks like, but what we understand is that they are going to look at all funds, not just the general obligation funds. They're going to look at any other funds that you may have, and the utility is a fund, and they may take that information, pull it together, and they could give us one rate based on that. We don't know if it's one rate or if it's 2 rates, but they're just combining it, but they're going to use all funds to make a rating decision. So, honestly, this board could take no action tonight, and they may choose to change our rating based on that information, the fact that they've taken our utility and they've taken our general obligation bonds, mashed it all together, make some decision about the rating. We don't know what that will or won't be until they do it, but that's possible. It is possible that they could have a change up or down on that particular bond rating. That is not happening with S&P and Fitch. They're not making any changes to how they evaluate their ratings at this time. Is it certainly possible that in the future that the other 2 agencies could consider a rating change? Absolutely. They're going to look at decisions this board makes, and they're going to evaluate our bond rating. And Moody's is kind of a different animal because they've made a change to how their process is going to work. S&P and Fitch probably staying in the same methodology for how they do it. We're not going to know what those rate changes are going to be until the board makes decisions, that's communicated to these rating agencies, and they decide how to evaluate that. I know our financial advisor will be here. I believe he has outlined that there are some things that they look at very closely when they're making their decisions for rating. There are some items that they pay close attention to. So obviously, decisions that you make that may affect those items, that may be a spotlight on that. We just don't know until you give us further direction.
Vice Chairman Merrill.
Yes, I have a couple of questions. I wish we did have a list of those capital projects, but because you mentioned funding Site B, I want to clarify, that would be the $76 million
Yes,
sewer
ma'am.
plant on Ridge Road.
Yes, ma'am.
Would you, since we don't have a list of those capital projects in front of us, if that were not being built on Ridge Road, then is that the largest project on that list? And approximately how many more $1 million is the 12 Mile Creek or Short Line Extension? Or is it or would you say that it's primarily to fund the Site B project?
So, and I'm going to ask for staff to weigh in if I say something wrong, but I believe the capital program was over $700 million.
Okay.
So is that the lion's share of it? Actually, $274 million is the largest project in that whole plan. Now, the whole thing was over $700 million. So there's a lot of other projects, small and large, that all fit within that. I cannot give you that tonight. Obviously, it is our goal to provide you with that. But I will tell you, it was a very large capital program, which was why there was a significant rate increase, is because of the capital program was large and long, and a long time frame.
So I think that list is going to be very important. I do want to go back to the 22% rate increase for water-only customers.
Yes, ma'am.
And you talked about a balancing. You didn't go into much detail about that, but the comments that I have received when that event occurred back in September and conversations prior to September was, why would water-only customers have to suffer a 22% rate increase for something they'll never use?
Sure.
Because many of those customers have aqua sewer.
Right.
And they're experiencing those increases. And then some of those customers have their own septic tanks. So why should they suffer the burden of a 33% rate increase over the past couple of years, plus an additional 22% rate increase, if you can walk me through that?
Certainly, absolutely. So the balancing was an evaluation of the cost to serve. So we had Stantec, which is our company that does our rate model, as well as our system development fee study. They evaluated the cost to provide water to customers. Understand, it didn't matter whether you had sewer or not. It's how much does it cost to provide water to customers. So we have 53,000 water customers. Now, there are roughly 13,600 water-only customers, but they are part of the large subset of all water customers. So what does it take to actually run a plant, pay for the chemicals, pay for the staffing, pay for all the work that goes into sending water to every water customer? Based on that information, they did the same thing for sewer customers. How much are sewer customers paying for sewer? How much does it cost for the plant to treat the sewer, to put the pipes in the ground, to fix the pipes, staffing, everything? What they found was that our water customers were actually paying less than what it costs to provide the service of providing water to water customers, all water customers. Sewer customers were actually paying more than what it cost to provide sewer service to themselves. So what you had is, you had water paying less, sewer paying more. So sewer customers were actually subsidizing the cost of the whole utility for residential customers. You had a certain amount of revenue. If it was 50 million, a certain amount was generated by for water, a certain amount was generated by sewer, and it was out of balance. So what they recommended is that you have the sewer customers pay what their cost of service is, which actually lowered their rate. Have water customers pay what their cost of service is, which actually raised their water rate. It wasn't an attempt to gain more money. So the amount of money stayed the same at that time. If it was 50 million, it came out to be 50 million.
But in all fairness, this algorithm is to cover a $700 million capital list of projects.
In the end, rates actually fund capital, absolutely.
Okay.
It has to
So-
do with funding capital.
So I definitely understand and appreciate the explanation you just gave.
Sure.
What was the name of that?
It's Stantec.
Stantec.
Yeah, they're the ones who did the
How-
evaluation.
Thank you. How often do they do this?
That was our very first time that we had that day. They do that all over the country, but for us, that is the first time we have evaluated our cost to serve for our customers. And we did that across residential and non-residential customers because we needed to see what that balance was as well.
So we have just incorrectly for decades billed people wrong.
Well, I would say that it's not about billing wrong. It's about when rate changes were occurring, we weren't evaluating whether or not that rate was appropriate to cost to serve. We weren't looking at how much it cost to actually provide the water to those customers, provide the sewer to those customers. We were just doing rate changes. If you do rate changes over time, but you don't look at your cost to serve, then you will eventually get an imbalance.
Thank you.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
how was staff determining rates?
It was still based on capital, always based on capital. What are your capital needs? What are your operational needs? You have to look at those two things. That's what goes into a rate decision for your utility. So what are your operational costs? What are your capital costs? That builds into a rate.
Brian, I have a question. Our system development fees are generating, and we're trying to figure out if it's anomaly or not.
11.7, I think, was the
0.7.
amount that we have for this
And
fiscal
normally
year.
it generates
About 5 million.
about 5.
Yeah.
So approximately $6 million dollars more than it did, and yet the cost that we may lose is 3 million, somewhere in that area.
A little over 3.4.
So the system development fees, which is paid by a developer or a home builder for building the new home, is actually paying a greater share than it normally does. Now, that could go up or that could go down. 5 million's been pretty much a constant for as long as I can remember.
I think it's been around that amount, yes, sir.
So is it safe to say we didn't increase the system development fees last year, did we?
We did actually do an increase of our system development fees, and I don't remember the exact date we did this, but the board had actually selected a certain methodology. There's 3 methodologies for a system development fee that you can choose. We do a study, and then that information comes back, and you have 3 that you can choose from. The one that the board chose, I can't remember the name. Combined method. It gave you different amounts that you could charge.
Right.
The board actually, at that time, did not choose to take the higher number for that. You chose to take a lesser number. So I believe it was about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. We came back to you and said, well, really we're leaving money on the table. We really should consider having that system development fee what was suggested at the highest amount for the buy-in, for the combined method, and the board took action to do that. Now, it wasn't like some huge increase, but it was an increase over what those were.
But it was enough to generate approximately $6 million.
I think it's a combination. You had an increase as well as we've had more development, because development drives the system development fee. So you've had more projects that are going through the development process, they're paying the system development fee, as well as you had higher system development fees. So you're collecting more money from that.
And the other question is, the rates, they don't, the rates cover the CIP, but like the employees, you know,
It covers-
if you build a new sewer plant, you're gonna have to have new employees to run that new sewer plant,
Yeah,
correct?
and I may have said this incorrectly, but it's operations as well as capital. So
Yeah.
you have to look at your rates, and what are the operations, which are employees? What are your fuel costs? What are your chemical costs, your electrical costs? That's one component. And then your capital costs, which that is, you know, do I want to build the sewer plant? Do I want to build another water plant? All that together is what generates what your rate is that you need.
So if we didn't borrow the money for a sewer plant and instead we saved up cash, with the like an $11 million increase that we didn't expect necessarily, you know, in the future, at some point, we could pay cash for the sewer plant and have it ready to go and not have to increase rates, and we just see how that works out. And I've been a big advocate of letting the developers pay for the new infrastructure so that the current residents are not paying for the new residents to come here and offsetting the cost that goes to them. So that's pretty much that's all I got.
So, and that was one of the decision points that the board is going to have to give us some direction on. You know, how do you want to fund the capital projects that you do want to do? First of all, we need to know what things do you want to do. There's a big list. How far are we going to whittle that list down to? And then that list is going to have a cost. Well, how are we going to pay for that? Is it all cash? Do we have enough cash? Is it some debt? Those are decisions you're going to have to tell us. And if you say, listen, we don't want to pay debt for this stuff in the future. We want to do it with cash. Well, then we have to decide how much cash do we need to build this at this time. Again, is it 10 years from now, 20 years from now? That's how we build out our model. When are you going to build it? How much cash do you need to build it? So that then we can either fund it with cash or fund it with debt. And we're not going to know that till you tell us that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Right. Mentioned the system development.
Mm-hmm.
That's not free money, is it? I mean.
What do you mean
for?
for-
Include that in your cost of your operational cost.
So
Along with the rate?
So system development fees, number one, we collect that and we appropriate that on arrears. So we don't forecast what that number is going to be. We wait until we have the money. So once we have the money, we know how much it is, then we build it into here's your rate model for this year. And that can be used for debt, so we can pay debt with it, and it can be used for capital. We cannot use that funds for operations. It is specifically for debt or capital. And it's also broken down by basin. So I'm not collecting money in Crooked Creek and sending it to spend in 12 Mile Creek. We spend it in Crooked Creek if we collect it in Crooked Creek. We spend it in 12 Mile Creek if we collect it in 12 Mile Creek. So it's split that way. So it has some defined purposes.
You say you build it into the model?
Once we know it, then that goes into it.
It's built into the model.
Yes,
So
sir.
It affects the rates.
It does, yes, sir. Absolutely.
Brian,
Yes, sir.
last week staff got a presentation from our Davenport Financial Advisor, correct?
Yes, sir.
You're familiar with that?
I am, yes, sir.
It was the rate rollback briefing and also a water and sewer fund, discussion materials for the water and sewer fund.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'm going to just point out some of the conclusions from that rate rollback briefing, and if you can just confirm that this is the sense of that presentation that you got as well. Among the consequences that were pointed out from this rate rollback that's being considered, and I think the assumptions that were used by the advisor involved a rate rollback that was effective April 1st.
Okay.
And the resolution here makes the rate rollback effective January 1st. So whatever the consequences more dire if this is adopted tonight. Among those consequences, implementation of a rate rollback would have Union County Water fail several tests. There would be impacts to bond rating, ability to borrow, and cost to borrow, significant operational and capital impacts to managing the utility. Is that your recollection?
That is. Also, I do want to point out that that was also built on the assumption that certain projects were left into the model. And so that until the board gives us directions what actually stays in or stays out, that could change. But that was based on certain projects were defined as staying in the actual capital plan. But yes, sir, that is my recollection.
Okay, and in terms of specific impacts on customers, and you talked about this tonight in your presentation, were we to do this rollback, some customers would end up paying more. Sewer-only customers would end up paying more, for instance. Is the rollback being contemplated tonight? Does it include effects on ag and industrial customers?
It was our direction to bring back residential only, and that for the future meeting, for you to consider those additional rate classifications. So tonight, if the board makes any decision, is for residential customers only.
So the
Okay.
board gave you that direction?
That was direction that we got at the meeting that was December 5th.
Okay. And in terms of SDF fees, system development fees that have been mentioned tonight, now those are fees that the state, of course, allows us to collect depending on the model that we use in collecting them. Now, those fees are collected, but there's also the expectation that there'll be capital projects that are funded in part by those fees in the
Yes.
basin in which they were raised, right?
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Okay, so if we end up rolling back rates and curtailing or eliminating or suspending some of these capital projects, in your view, is there a litigation risk to us?
Oh, I would rather our legal
Might there
staff
be a litigation risk, Mr.
Speak to
General
that.
Counsel?
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say is you can get sued for anything, whether there's merit to it or not. And normally that doesn't and should not drive decisions of the county in assessing what the right course is. For this one, I think we're in a place where we probably need a whole lot more information to be able to determine the level and severity of that type of litigation risk. And that's something that if we found that there was some, we would want to brief you all in closed session so as to make sure that the county's interests are as protected as possible.
Okay.
May I make a statement, Mr.?
Yeah.
So to your point about system development fees, a system development fee study has to be done at a minimum at least every 5 years. We are in the window where we have to redo our system development fee study. In fact, Stantec will be doing that for us, but they will not start until sometime after the first of the year because you have to give us direction on what projects they will include in that evaluation. So what Commissioner Williams is talking about is a system development fee is really based on the capital projects that are built into that plan. What you can't do is say, I'm going to build a bunch of stuff and then not actually do it. You can say, this is my 20-year plan, and I'm going to do all of these things in 20 years. And it doesn't mean that you have to do it all in year 1 or year 5. You can say, I'm working towards all of these things in a 20-year plan. But you can't tell them, I'm going to build this when you actually do not intend on building something. That cannot be built into that model. That is an issue that we'd have to address. You have to give them, these are the projects that we intend on doing, whatever time frame that is, and then they use that to evaluate those 3 different models, buy-in, combined, and incremental, and then they tell you, these are your system development fees that you can charge based on the capital projects as well as the methodology the state has created that we have to follow.
Well, I've got a very practical question tonight. I mean, if this board decides to do this rate rollback over, not just in this year, but in the schedule of years, how practically do we make a decision about what capital projects we proceed with? Because we've got a bunch of capital project ordinances that the prior board has approved, in most cases unanimously. So as a practical matter, how do we decide which ones proceed?
Honestly, I think it's going to be, that's why it's going to be a heavy lift for you on the 17th. We're going to have to tell you how far along we are on some of these projects. What is the cost we've spent? How much is left to be spent on these projects? What does it do? What does it serve for the utility? And the other thing that we'll have to talk to you about is if you choose not to do something, which is perfectly fine, there is often something that we have to do because we didn't do that. It's a system. So when we're choosing to build, I'm going to give you an example, okay? If we decide that we are not going to build, we're not going to finish the West Fork Interceptor, well, what that does is that creates even more of a stress on our East Fork Interceptor. And we'll have to figure out a way to address that stress on that East Fork Interceptor, because that West Fork was intended to allow you to have some stress relief for that. You'll have to figure out, what do you want to do with that? Same thing holds true with any other capital project that you have. If you choose to do something, then there may be something else over here that you don't do. But if you choose not to do it, then there's another item that you have to do because you're choosing not to do this. It's a system. So we have to explain those things to you so you're aware, I choose not to do this project. Okay, we still have a need. How do we address that need, and how does that move forward?
But the practical problem that's facing us if we roll back rates tonight is we've got all these open projects out there. I mean, as a practical matter, I mean, every day, every week, there's some progress being made on all these various capital projects that we've approved ordinances for as a board. I mean, does Public Works make those decisions about what we slow down, what we stop, what we, hit the pause button on? Does, I hope not, do one or two members of this board, make the decision about where we hit the pause button on these capital projects? That's why I think it's extraordinarily dangerous for us to make a, reckless decision about rolling back rates, and then, January 17th, we have a presentation where we get good information from our financial advisor, from our bond counsel. We get more information on these projects to find out what the, impacts, and heavy lifts, as you said, that are before us after we've made the rollback decision. I mean, does that make any sense in terms of good governance? I think not. Now, just one other thing, if I could maybe ask Beverly some questions, would that be okay?
Certainly, absolutely.
Just that kind of get,
I'm not the
into.
chairman, I'm sorry.
No, that's
Would that
fine.
be
Yeah,
okay
that's
if-
fine. Beverly, if you'll come up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I ask you a quick thing while she's coming up?
Yes, sir.
We also have the state that regulates what we can do with 12 Mile and other waste treatment plants. The 80% rule, you got to have a plan, 90% you got to be effectively into it.
Yes,
Does
sir.
that not
That is
apply as
accurate.
well?
Yes, sir. We do have state requirements we have to meet, and they do monitor our capacity and our flow. And there is a point at which we reach where they will say, where are you in the process? If you're at 80% of actual flows and you don't have a plan, they're going to slow you down and tell you, okay, we need a plan. When you reach 90% of actual flows, if you don't have that plan implemented and started, then they're going to say, wait a minute, hold on, you need to slow down because you haven't even started your plan. Those are things that the state monitors, and they do dictate to us.
And they can take over the system.
Yes, they can. I don't think that that's common, but they certainly have the ability to step in if we're not managing the utility. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Commissioner Williams, if you wouldn't mind, just because I have a question that Beverly might can answer, but I might need staff to think about this one while you're asking your questions. How much do we have in reserves in Public Works?
I don't have that number with me tonight. We are actually working with Stantec tomorrow to update our rate model, and we will have that information available at the 17th meeting.
Okay, so we collect approximately $73 million per year.
Yes,
Yeah, around
that's correct.
72 million is approximately what we get. It could be 73, but it's in that range.
Okay, and then our expenditures for operations is in the 30,
34 million. roughly.
so about 35 million at tops right now. So all that extra revenue goes into paying off for capital projects. So maybe that reserve fund, how many millions of dollars is in the reserve fund? If anybody, do you know that answer, Brian, or have you
Off
seen
the
that?
top of my head, no, I will
Okay.
tell you that your, Bear can speak to this, you have a policy that we will hold 365 days of reserves on hand. That's also built into how our rating agencies look at us for our financial requirements.
And
our
how many
financial policies.
how many days reserve do we have right now?
I think we have about 550 days on hand. Now keep in mind, that number fluctuates. So it fluctuates based on when we start paying off projects that we need to pay cash on. That is not a static number. It fluctuates, but I think it's somewhere in the 550-day range at this point.
Okay. Commissioner Williams, I
Isn't
apologize.
that kind of like what Moore County just went through to cover a catastrophe that's hitting the county?
So our reserves are for that purpose. They are for if you have any issues with your utility, also to cover any unknowns that come. Again, our minimum is 365 days. Understand that the rating agencies obviously look at how we compare to other utilities. So we may say our minimum's 365, but if other peer utilities are at 500, they're gonna look at us and say, where are you in this? Are you at 500, are you at 600, or are you at 365? They look at that information. Our policy's 365, but ultimately the rating agencies look at the whole picture, not just what our policy is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And even with that ample reserve that we have in Public Works, we don't have a top revenue bond rating, do we? With S&P, with Moody's, with Fitch?
No, that is
Okay,
correct.
thank you. Now, Beverly, I appreciate you coming before us to answer some questions here. And I know nobody can get into the weeds like this better than you can. So could you just kind of first explain to us, explain to me, what is a general bond indenture, and what are bond covenants? What are those things?
So your general bond indenture is basically a contract between you and your bondholders that you state that you agree to meet your minimum bond covenant requirements. And for revenue bonds, your sole source of backing of that is the revenues of the water and sewer system. And it's water and sewer combined. It's not separated out, water revenue bonds or sewer revenue bonds. It's one combination. The difference with general obligation bonds is it's backed by your taxing authority or your property taxes. For revenue bonds, you have to prove to your bondholders that you are able to pay back your debt service with the revenues generated from your system. And what our bond trust indenture says is that we will not only pay our debt service payments, we will have enough reserves or net revenues available each year at 120%. So as an example, when we enter into 2024, we will have our highest debt service ever for revenue bonds because the 2021 revenue bond issuance that we did had 2 years of capitalized interest, which meant we didn't make a debt service payment from revenues until fiscal year 2024.
Real quick, what is that ratio, the latest ratio roughly?
The latest
For
ratio
For the
is
coverage? Yeah.
very high because we did increase the rates to cover the 2021 bond issuance, and we were at around 5 instead of the 1.2. We're at like 5.0. But that is by design because when we issued the 2021 revenue bonds, we had to meet the additional bond test that's also in our bond trust indenture, which proves to the bondholders at the time that's investing in our bonds that we will be able to afford to pay that additional debt service payment the day we issue the bonds. So we've had 2 years of rate increases with the 2021 revenue bonds already been issued that we've been able to fund capital projects with cash that we normally would not have been able to in the past. So our reserves are higher today because of that reason. However, we expect to see those decline rapidly over the next couple years. When we go to 2024, our debt service payments are going to be $25 million, where in this past year, they were only around $10 million. So to
And
meet
just to stop you
that,
there real quick, because this is complicated stuff. When you say those bonds that got issued, a lot of that interest was capitalized, you mean we didn't initially have to make payments on it, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so we had a big pile of money, in our reserves. We didn't
Right.
have to make payments on that huge issuance, revenue issuance. But now,
coming
we're
due.
getting into a situation where we have to regularly make those revenue
Right.
bond payments, right?
Correct.
So that's why there'll be a fast drawdown of those funds, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, when we talk about a general bond indenture, that applies generally, right? Not just to revenue, but it can also apply to, like county stuff. I
For
mean, I know
us-
you've got can you explain, like, there's a series indenture and then there's a general bond indenture? What's the difference?
The series is for each individual bond issuance.
Okay.
And is tied to that. The general trust
Particular
indenture
issuance.
was established in the beginning for our revenue bonds with our trustee. And then it's been updated over time because system development fees didn't used to be in existence. Now they are, and you can include those in your coverage calculations.
So the general indenture applies to multiple series, not just to one issuance?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And there are continuous disclosures we have to make, right? To the
That's
trustee, to the representative of the bondholders in terms of our coverage ratios, our financial health?
Yes. we
Can you
have-
speak some to how those disclosures work and,
Right, so annually, we are required to submit on a municipal registered bond website for all bondholders to see in the universe, our annual financial statements, which require us to prove our coverage calculations at that time based on the net revenues available for the water and sewer system. We are also required to submit on the same website our adopted budget ordinance, which includes the estimated revenues of the system and expenditures, and also we are required to disclose any water and sewer rate changes. As mentioned before, if there's a change tonight, we do have to disclose that within 10 days. If there's any other event that takes place, such as a credit rating change from Moody's, Fitch, or S&P, we do have to disclose that also within 10 days.
now let's talk some about, negative things that can happen in terms of our credit worthiness. One would be a default now, and the other would just be a downgrade where there's not a default. Can you talk about the difference between the two?
Right.
First of all, what's a default?
A default would mean that we were not able to make our debt service payments or meet our coverage requirements
Okay.
as outlined in the bond trust indenture.
So that could mean either not making the payments or you're not meeting the ratios you've talked about, like the coverage ratios.
That's correct.
Okay. But you could have a credit downgrade and still meet your ratios, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So even if we roll back rates and, let's say at least initially, we hope that there's not going to be a default, there's not going to be a violation of our coverage ratios, we could still see a credit downgrade, right? Because there's not as much revenues coming in. You've just explained that we're going to have an acceleration of the debt service of the payments we're having to make now because we're past the period where we capitalized that huge issuance. So let's say the rating downgrades start. That clearly affects our revenue bond portfolio. Now, we've got plans in Public Works for doing revenue bond issuances, right? I mean, whether we do a new wastewater plant or not, in the Crooked Creek Basin, we've got plans, right, for revenue bond issuances outside of the new wastewater facility in the Crooked Creek. Is that correct, Mr. Matthews?
Yes, sir, and that goes back to the direction of, are we going to change that philosophy? Because we are
Yeah.
intended on, I believe, 2024 is what the model says we need to do another issuance of debt.
Okay.
If we were to continue with a number of these projects.
Okay, so, we do have some revenue issuances that we're looking at, whether or not there's a new wastewater facility. Now, if we have a credit downgrade and we know we're in an environment where interest rates have been going up, that's kind of a double whammy, isn't it? If we need to go to the capital markets and borrow revenue bonds, we're not only paying more just because rates are going up, but we'll pay more because we've had, a rating downgrade, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and when an economy softens, and it looks like, unfortunately, we may be heading into a period where the economy's softening, where, we're looking at the R word, maybe recession, Credit spreads or spreads between borrowers with excellent tip-top rates and those, that don't have the top rates, those tend to widen, don't they? They tend to get larger.
That's correct. They do.
Okay, so if we have a credit rating downgrade, the credit spreads that we're facing may get larger, conceivably.
Correct.
Okay. Now, Brian had mentioned earlier that Moody's had made a change to their methodology in terms of how they do their rating. Let's say that we have a downgrade in our revenue category. How might that impact us with Moody's in our general obligation rating?
I think as he stated before, and our FA will go over this in a lot more detail, there is definitely a correlation now between the two. They look at your government-wide debt versus just your revenue bond debt and your general obligation bond debt separately. They will be looking at your reserve ratios together,
So they
your
look at it all
cash to
together.
liquidity debt ratios. They will look at all of that together going forward.
Okay, and in the coming year, we're looking at working on some issuances of general obligation debt, right? For the bonds that just passed for the schools, for Forest Hills High School, East Elementary, for South Piedmont Community College. If we go to capital markets looking to do a general obligation issuance, that would be a triple whammy, I guess, actually. Rising rate environment, credit spreads increasing. Oh, and we have a credit downgrade that now affects our general obligation portfolio. Is that a fair summary of what could happen?
Most definitely could. Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate
Can I
that.
ask you one question before you leave?
If you wouldn't mind, if I could ask you something, because you've scared me, Beverly. I'm telling you, it's, I'm scared to death now that, we've got $705 billion, almost $1 billion. I said it would be $1 billion before it's over with, and that was after the $300 million Yadkin plant. We've raised rates 33%, we raised rates 22%, and now you're telling me doom and gloom, and we're going to build this $274 million plant in the midst of all this doom and gloom, but somehow keeping the rates high and putting 7% a year for the next future would work. Well, we were told back then that 3% or 2% a year would work and pay for the sewer plant, the water plant, and all these other projects, which was not true, it was not accurate. So I look at what we're talking about here is tonight we're going to be discussing our special meeting leasing the land for the Site B project for 10 years to Lucas Landscaping, which means for 10 years we won't have to worry about $274 million. Real estate agents will tell you real quick that please don't go out and buy a bunch of furniture for the house that you're trying to buy at the last minute, because when you go into closing, it downgrades your credit score and you may have a problem with getting your loan. And so that's kind of where Union County is at. If we don't go out and buy a bunch of stuff, and if we don't go out and buy a brand new truck, our house loan will go through. We'll be able to pay our house loan. We just can't afford a $100,000 pickup truck to go in the yard to make it look even better. And that's what that sewer plant is. That's almost half of the money that we're talking about for the CIP. And that's if we don't need it. We probably won't need some of the other projects like line extensions, expansion of lines, making them bigger. The reality of this is 43,000 homes in western Union County, in just western Union County. Because with what sewer we have capacity for now, that's spoken for, not that the homes are built, that's promised. You take that, you add the 8 million gallon sewer plant that's been proposed for Site B, you take the other sewer that we have available just for new homes alone in the western section of Union County, you're talking about 43,000 plus homes. That doesn't include Monroe, who has their own sewer. That doesn't include Wingate or Marshall. So the question is to us as the county commissioners who have said we're going to manage growth, and every county commissioner that's got elected for the last longest time, we're for managed growth. That's opening the floodgates, and we can make a decision of whether, hey, we're not going to borrow all that money, so we're not going to raise your rates to borrow all that money. We're going to live within our means and do the right thing by the taxpayers. We're not going to be in dire straits and worried about our credit rating going down when we're out there thinking about buying a brand new truck. and trying to buy a house at the same time and pay for it. So, you know, I'm not afraid of the things going down, because we're going to start cutting, and tonight's going to be a first step in that. And we promised people that we would do that. We said we were going to manage growth, and 43,000 homes, you'll still have a lot of homes built. There's still gallons of sewer, but the potential in the end is 43,000 homes in western Union County. And that's new homes. So, Commissioner Brian Helms, do you have any comments that you'd like to make? You haven't spoke or asked any questions.
Yeah, so one question, sorry, before you step away. So just for clarification, you mentioned 2 years of rate increases. Specifically, what were the larger projects that those 2 years of rate increases were intended to fund?
The Yadkin, the
Okay.
debt service for Yadkin.
Okay.
This is a major driver of that.
And that really accounted for approximately 33% increase in our utility rates? Is that also correct?
I believe, yes, it was
Okay.
15 and 15.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, 15 and a half and 15 and a half. Is it safe to assume that if we decided to return rates back to a previous time per the resolution, that that would not impact our ability to pay the debt service for the Yadkin project?
We have not done that full calculation yet. As I stated before, we are working with Stantec now to update the long-term rate model. We will have a clearer indication once that is updated. They are also incorporating into that our year-end financials for fiscal year 2022. That gives us the most updated data that we have.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Richard Helms.
Yeah, I'll ask you the first question. First
Okay.
question is, if we're not following the specifications of the bond commitments, can they not call them due?
Yes, there is an acceleration clause in our bond trust indenture that says if we default on our bonds at any time or our covenants, the trustee can come in and request that we pay them 100% of our outstanding debt, which we do not have the cash to do, which would be $434 million.
Okay, thank you.
And just to clarify, that could include a default in terms of not meeting your covenants, not just missing payments, but
Correct.
not meeting your covenants. And if we couldn't make those payments and there was an acceleration clause triggered, that would, I mean, I would think Chapter 11 bankrupt, not Chapter 11, but whatever the municipal chapter is, bankruptcy filing would have to be considered.
I would defer to the attorneys on that.
All right, does anybody want to make a motion so we can move on to the special meeting?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Brian Helms.
Yes, I'd like to make the motion to adopt the resolution of Union County Water and Sewer District Board of Governors for the amendment to the Union County Water and Sewer District rate and fee schedule related to the water and sewer rates.
Any discussion on that?
Well, I tried to read it tonight, the first time I'd seen it. Are we not operating as a board anymore, or is it just your game?
No, we're operating as a board, just not
Well, it's
behind
not
closed
happening.
doors.
It's not happening, and I'll tell you, I can't support this. We clearly are in a situation, we don't have enough information to even begin to decide what we want to do. It looks like January 17th will be the first time we have a full picture. And it's not only irresponsible, it's almost criminal to try to push something through for a political agenda. Because this is clearly not, I mean, this plan has been out. The Yadkin is a system that was put in place because we don't have water now in the eastern part of the county. We will now, once next July, we'll have it if, for the next 100 years. And Brian, the other thing is that paying the debt on the Yadkin is a piece of it. You still got to operate it.
Yes, sir.
So that's one of the reasons that you had rate increases to operate. So do we deny the people in the Yadkin Basin the privilege of having availability of water? And that's what this amounts to.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Commissioner Williams.
Just some brief points. One, I'd like to just reiterate what Commissioner Helm said about, it's extremely poor government to, get your information in your presentation after you've made a sweeping decision like this on rates. I mean, don't we want to deliberate and consider and chew on the information that we get, the expert advice from our financial advisor, from Davenport, from our bond counsel, and then make a decision? I mean, excuse my language, it's ass backwards, So I would say that. And also, I mean, I just raised the very practical question that here we are rolling back rates, if we do that tonight. And we've got the very real practical problem of, well, what capital projects do we move forward with? I mean, this board has approved, the prior board in most cases unanimously, has approved a whole host of capital projects. Most of them, the vast majority of them, have nothing to do with increasing capacity. Which ones do we move ahead on? I mean, that's a very real question, and I'm not comfortable having that decision made by any entity other than this board, as it should be. So, that would be my other point, and I would just strongly advise and really implore all of my fellow commissioners here to just take your time. These are weighty issues. This is a big vote. And, there's nothing wrong, there's nothing, shameful about taking your time and wrestling with these issues. Let's consider this, after we've gotten the presentation. Let's not make a big decision and then get the information. It should be the other way around. So I just, again, would implore my colleagues here to do the right thing and not act on this resolution tonight. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Is-
And I would make one comment to that. Commissioner Helms, you voted against the 33% increase for the Yadkin, and then you voted for it. Commissioner Williams, you campaigned to roll that 33% rate back, and now you're a fan of it. And there was no talk of defaulting on loans. There was no talk of any of that. And now all of a sudden, that it's being built, we have to pay those costs. We have to cover those costs. I would love to take it back 55%. I would love to take the whole thing back, but we can't because this board, not this current board, but as the Union County Board of Commissioners had made that decision. No matter if it was a 3-2 vote, which a lot of those votes were 3-2 votes, it was decided. And, you guys can be worried about it, but there's a way to handle it. But our staff needs some direction. They need to know if we're intent on building that sewer plant in the next 10 years. Are we going to build it in 20 years? Are we going to start saving money now that we build it whenever we get the cash saved up? Are we going to ask for an increase in system development fees? Are we going to have contributions from other sources to pay for it, like we got contributions from the state? So, Commissioner Brian Helms, did you have a comment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. What I'd like to say is this, is that, I'd like a chance to respond to our fellow commissioners. This decision, this motion has been referred to as criminal. I would argue that the intention of putting the burden of future growth on the backs of the existing ratepayers was somewhat irresponsible. The comment was made that this is poor government. I would argue that the existing rate, fees, and schedules that we are under currently, which were decided on May 18th after the initial primary election of this past year, in response to that primary election, were also irresponsible. That would be my definition of poor government. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Vice Chair Merrill, do you have any comments, further comments?
I do, and I would like to say that I plan to support this motion because I also believe the talks of recession have been mentioned tonight. Possible litigation has been mentioned tonight. And yet we have more than 13,000 customers that are water only that have received a 55% rate increase and will never be sewer customers. And in addition to that, they got a rate increase from their sewer company this past year. Aqua Sewer gave many of those customers increases. So not only did 13,600 potentially, I know that's a rough number, 13,620 customers, somewhere in that neighborhood, those customers, Union County taxpayers, got a 55% rate increase and another increase from Aqua Sewer. So I believe they have litigation that they can take in mind from tonight's comments. But my concern is that sewer-only customers got a 9% increase, but water and sewer customers got a 22% decrease and a small increase. So I definitely understand and appreciate the balanced conversation. I do understand all of that, but it is not the water-only customers' fault that they were being billed incorrectly. And I do understand that from time to time, you have to look and see what is the cost of service. But I think a 55% rate increase is certainly, in this type of economic environment that we have right now, a 55% rate increase is astronomical on 13,000 citizens, when 41,000 citizens are the ones using the water plus the sewer. So I plan on supporting this motion.
Okay.
I think we need to clarify something. Aqua Sewer is not anything to do with Union County. That's a private entity. There are a number of private entities around. I lived in a neighborhood for a while that had one. They are expensive, there's no doubt about it. But you can't include, you know, I know you're mad that you have to pay more for sewer, then you chose a neighborhood that uses a private sewer system. But we've got to look to the future. And one of the things that hadn't been discussed tonight, and Stoney's wanting to stop all growth. Well, it's also going to stop our economic development growth, which is the factor that helps to reduce the taxes on the residences of the county. So it's going to shut down our ability to recruit companies to here. We have enough problem because of limited sewer, but it also, there are people, I mean, we've been recruiting jobs in here that run $50,000 to $75,000 a year. Good jobs for our people. So we're going to eliminate that by cutting out and not having any growth. That's irresponsible.
I think irresponsible is growing government and growing more jobs, and I think 13,600 citizens in Union County that are paying more for fuel, groceries, utilities. It is my turn to speak. Thank you. I think their 55% rate increase, in addition to their utilities and other bills going up, does matter. And I do think that those 13,000 taxpayers do matter.
And I would say there's been a lot of talk of killing economic development. In the last period, Monroe has annexed our areas for industrial development at the airport. They have sewer and they have water, according to one of the town council members last night. They have plenty and they're ready to go. City of Monroe's building a new plant. That tax revenue also comes into Union County. It's also around 4-lane roads instead of 2-lane country roads that you're trying to put 43,000 new homes on. So with that, everybody's had a chance to speak. I'll call the motion to call the question. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
3-2. All right, motion has been on the floor, and will you restate the motion, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So the motion is to adopt the resolution of the Union County Water and Sewer District Board of Governors for amendment to the Union County Water and Sewer District rate and fee schedule related to water and sewer rates.
All right, motion's on the floor. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
3-2. Okay. That is the, now we're going to adjourn the Board of Governors meeting, and now we will call water and sewer rates. With some of the discussion that we've had,